Hello friends and welcome to my guide on how to play position 4 soft support. In my opinion, this is the most difficult role in terms of decision making in the early game. It's fun because you have so much freedom, but you gotta figure out how to best use that time in order to win the game, and hopefully this guide will help you figure that out. I recommend you go watch the hard support guide I made recently if you haven't already, because there are many support fundamentals that are shared between both support roles, and I'm gonna do my best to not repeat anything we covered in that video so that we can go into new information in this guide. But you kind of need to know that fundamental stuff, so if you haven't already seen it, please go check it out. The support roles are getting closer and there's more overlap than there ever has been in the past, but they are still separate roles. Up to Guardian, and for all new players, you can play both roles kind of the same and it's whatever. As you get into Crusader Archon, you can get away with it, but it starts to be important to actually play soft support instead of just hard support and to have that difference between the roles. Again, every game's going to be unique, and so like sometimes there will be some blurred lines there, but in general, soft supports do have higher farm priority. So if both supports are in the same area and there's gold, typically you try to push it towards the 4 supports, but some sharing is totally okay. Hard supports just don't need the gold and XP as much. For example, Warlock, once he hits 6, he doesn't have any items, he's dirt poor, it's still pretty easy for him to land a good ultimate, for him to use his fatal bonds and cast a good upheaval. But you compare that to someone like Earthshaker, yes, he can use his abilities, he can contribute, but isn't it a lot easier to have a Blink Dagger so you can get that big team fight ultimate? Same with Tusk, right? If he has a Blink Dagger and an Aghanim's, now you can actually snowball save people, you can blink in, punch through BKB, kick people back. You need items to be able to really do your job. Now, hard supports, of course, will scale. Everyone scales with golden XP, but soft supports are just going to do it better, just due to the nature of their kits. Few other things that lead to the differences between the soft support and hard support. Hard supports buy more consumables, for example, tangos, to invest in their carry to get them through that laning stage, and then throughout the game, they buy more sentries, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it does add up over the course of a 30, 40, 50-minute game, along with the types of items you then build with that gold. So for example, these are all great items, but hard supports exclusively are almost always the ones buying the Glimmer Cape. And although it's a great item, it helps with survivability, when there's downtime and there's farming to be done, it doesn't really do anything for the hard support. But the soft support, who's more likely to buy a Blink Dagger or a Force Staff, those can be used defensively. But when there's downtime, it can also help you get to camps faster. It helps you have more mana and mana regen to farm faster with spells. They are items that are slightly leaning towards being able to farm more. Now, of course, there are certain items that will help you more or less in that regard, but when it comes down to the split, hard supports tend to buy those items that are great for the team, they're essential, but they're not really going to help the individual hero scale more, and 4 supports are more likely to buy the items that will help them scale more and maybe also help the team in some way. I'm going to keep it simple and say there are 2 general types of soft supports. There are initiators. They tend to be melee heroes like Earthshaker, and they're not the best at laning. So they care a lot about creep equilibrium. They do all sorts of tricks to get the creeps to come close to their offlane tower, and that's how they're going to enable their offlaner to safely farm. And there's an added benefit that the offlaner can now be left alone. They're still getting gold. They're not dying. That means we are free to move around the map now and roam and try to get things done. And we can actually do things because we have the tools to do that. Like Earthshaker has a long-range fissure, which is going to stun and block off someone's path. Earth Spirit has a long-range roll. Tusk has ice shards, and then Snowball gap closer, right? It is just part of the toolkit, even without a lot of levels. You don't need to buy those Blink Daggers. You can actually complete the ganks when you move around, but you don't have the ganking do other things like stacking. Now, when you're moving around the map a lot, no creeps are dying near you unless you have one of those abilities to farm, which only a few soft supports do. This can mean that when your ganks don't work out, you can end up low on XP and gold, which can be fine. It can be part of the plan. Like you gank mid, you don't get the kill, but it's still good that you did that because it's going to give the advantage to your mid laner, but you might fall behind. That's okay. As part of the game plan, space is now going to be given to you because you did work for your mid laner got ahead, they're going to go do work, you're going to have space. This is the part that is sometimes lacking in pub games. And so you'll see it in the pro scene a lot where 4 supports are given some time after the laning stage. They usually catch up on all the golden experience they need. They finish a key item like a Blink Dagger, and then they start rejoining and getting very active. In your pub games, be careful of this. Not many people are great at this, so you might spend more time in your own lane in order to get golden XP than you would at the higher ideal meta, but that's just the reality of pub games. Then we have damage dealers, who typically are ranged heroes because it makes it easier to harass with your auto attacks, which you then combine with spells to actually get kills. So they're much stronger in the lane. You focus on that harass and kill potential. You end up with more experience because you're staying in your lane more than roaming initiating type heroes. That's okay. So like initiators, a lot of the strength in the offlane will then come from the fact that the offlaner has a level or two advantage over the enemy carry because they've been left alone so much, whereas they end up lower level with a like laning soft support, but it's okay because all they need to do is throw out a stun, throw out some crowd control, and then your damage dealing soft support like Skywrath has his ultimate. You drop the ultimate, you do all the damage, you get the kill, and now you leave the lane for your offlaner to then catch up on their own. Of course, it's not cut and dry, just one or the other. Earthshaker does have tons of damage with a big Echo Slam. Skywrath Mage has a long-range slow and a silence to initiate with. There are ranged heroes like Dark Willow with tons of crowd control. There are melee initiators like Clockwork, who has one of the best 1v1 damaging spells through Battery Assault, and he can just bully out enemy supports in the lane if he gets them on their own in the jungle. So there's all types of heroes that adds to the complexity, but depending what you're aiming to do, hopefully this helps you understand kind of your rough approach in the early game. A lot of the draft considerations are the same as in the last video. I'm just going to brush over it here. Are we blocking or unblocking camps? Pretty much the same, just swap it. We're going to block the small camp now, unblock our hard camp. The one extra thing I want to highlight here is that creep dragging is available to soft supports, whereas hard supports do not have that option. We're going to talk about that more in a bit. A lot of the pregame considerations are pretty much the same. Extra consideration that you have an easier time courier sniping than hard supports due to the layout of the map and the fact that you are more likely to be moving around to be in that back area while still contributing to your team, whereas hard supports, if they're like camping near where couriers are, they're probably not doing anything for their carry. So you're more likely to be able to courier snipe as a position 4, and so you can put wards like behind the tower to spot couriers and go for those. In the laning stage, your job is to figure out how your team is going to win the game and help push them down that path. Nice and easy. This is why the 4 support role is very difficult, because the other roles all do a very similar thing at the start of every game, but the 4 support chooses. Do I stay in the offlane a lot? Do I roam to the mid lane a lot? Do I invest in my safe lane a lot? Am I stacking? Am I farming? Am I the winner? Right? This is why 4 support is tough. And of course, other roles have to think about this stuff too, and they have games where they will flex, but in my opinion, the 4 support gets to do this the most. It's a whole separate video to go that in depth into these topics. So for now, a couple questions to help you out. Who is going to win the game for you? Do you have a very good carry matchup? Then maybe the carry is who you need to invest in. How are you going to help them? Is it someone like Ricky and Ursa? They don't farm very fast in the early game, so maybe you need to give them a good lane and get them kills. You're going to rotate over there and help them a lot. Maybe it's a hero like Medusa or Alchemist. They don't have to have a good lane, so long as there's a lot of farming time for them to then hit their critical mass and then they go. So maybe you spend more time stacking, or maybe you help the mid lane, who is a playmaker, who will then make space for your carry to farm. At the same time, we need to think about the enemy team. Who is going to win the game for the enemy team? Can I do anything to slow them down? If it's not me, who can do it? If there is like an anti-mage we're very scared of, but I'm terrible at dealing with anti-mage, maybe I can help my mid laner who is good at dealing with anti-mage. So as soon as I help win the mid lane, that frees up the mid hero to then go deal with anti-mage. So then that's what I need to do. Rather than waste my time trying to stop an anti-mage that I don't have the tools to do, I have to figure out what I can do in that given game that still leads towards, the overarching goal of slowing down the anti-mage. Understanding the timings in a game is also going to help with all of this. Again, a very complex topic to know, like, this is when that hero is strong, so let me not waste my time on that. Let me help this hero who is weak in this period, and then we'll match up with this timing where all my heroes are strong versus their heroes. It's very tough. It's extremely draft dependent, so I don't want to talk too much about it, but if you're at least thinking about different timings in a game, that is a very good thing. Beyond that, a lot of my overarching laning advice is the same as the last video. We're just going to brush over it. Last hit's still important to you. Harassing consideration still good. Creep equilibrium. We're going to talk more about it in this video than we did in the last one, because there are some unique considerations for the soft support to think about or to take advantage of that hard supports do not have access to. So, hard supports want to be very careful about not pushing the lane, because you start as a safe lane in the best possible position right in front of your tower, and it can only get worse for you as you push your lane out. But the off lane is the reverse of that. You start in the worst position possible, and it can only get better. And if you accidentally shove your tower, or you shove your lane into the enemy tower, your creeps just die, and then you start again right in front of their tower. So you can't get worse. And so you don't care if you play really aggro, harass a ton, you draw those creeps to you, you mess up equilibrium, whatever. It's all just going to reset right there. In fact, it might actually be good for you, because pushing in creeps at the right time will delay the next creep wave so long that your creeps then meet under the tower, and then it actually ends up pushing out to your side. If that doesn't make sense to you, then you have to watch my creep equilibrium video to understand that stuff more. If the carry is tanking creeps out of the tower, you should just fight because you have a creep advantage. But if they are under the tower tanking creeps, you need to understand that that means they're busy. And that means if you do like a pull and the hard support wants to contest that, it is only the hard support who can contest that. So it is you and the offlaner versus that hard support. That's an opportunity for you to kill the hard support or just get this pull off that the carry can't contribute to. Or the carry needs to run over to help, and that means they're going to start missing creeps. So it is this window of opportunity that you can kind of force them into a situation they don't want to be in. Try to get the equilibrium back to your own tower before you roam. That is going to be the most likely situation where your offlaner is still able to farm and be safe, not feed, while you are gone. If it is in front of the enemy tower, they are more at risk of dying 2v1 while you are roaming. And before you roam, if you can have the hard camp open, that is best, because although you maybe got good equilibrium before leaving, it's 2v1, so they can do different tricks that your offlaner may not be able to stop on their own to get equilibrium back. If the hard camp is open, then the offlaner can try to do their own pull, or they can just farm that hard camp for a little bit. They're still getting golden experience. They're close enough to the lane to get experience from there as well. If they have to go back to their own jungle, then they are really leaving the lane. The carry is going to be, free, totally able to do whatever they want, and like the offlane is just going to waste time moving around. So it's best if the hard camp is open before you roam. Pulling, a lot of this is the same as the last video, but a couple extra points. Hard camps are naturally stronger than easy camps. That means when you both do a pull at the same time, it tends to favor you. So while creep equilibrium naturally favors the safe lane, we have an advantage when it comes to pulling. Hard camps can be stack pulled, so if you hit it at around 54 seconds, pull towards the enemy tower, you can pull the lane and stack. Any hero can do this extremely consistently. It's technically possible to do on the small camp for the safe lane. I have a video on it, but it is very difficult to do, and only some heroes can do it. So this is another advantage that the off lane, the soft supports have when it comes to pulling. A common question I get is, when do you stop playing the game of chicken, where I block the camp, they unblock, I block, they unblock, I block, they unblock? When do we stop buying sentries and stop doing that? So it depends on the matchup, but consider these 4 situations. If no one has a camp, that's usually okay because no one can do any pulls. We all play the lane. No one has an advantage one way or the other. If everyone has a camp, then if they do a pull, we do a pull. If we do a pull, they do a pull. Everyone is, again, we all have equal tools to play the game. The issue is when only one side has a camp. So if they have the camp, that's bad for us. If they do a pull, we can't do anything about it. But if we have a camp and they don't, we get to do a pull, we get the equilibrium we want, and they have no answer to that in terms of the pull camps. To summarize all of that, if the lane matchup is relatively close, as long as you have your pull camp available, the hard camp, you can kind of let them have their small camp. But if your matchup is really bad, then you want to do as much as you can to prevent them from having a small camp while you do have a hard camp. All right, let's talk about creep dragging. I'm going to cover this more in depth in another video because it's a very complicated topic that you don't really need to know right now. It's not very popular to do in this current meta, but I also don't recommend you do it if you are below Immortal and Divine, maybe, because you need to know what you're doing and your offlaner needs to know what they're doing in order for this to work. And you only really creep drag when the matchup is absolute garbage and the enemy is totally dumpstering you, free farming while denying you everything. But in like every rank below Divine, and Divine included, and Immortal, like people just do not play optimally and they will make basic mistakes and they will give you a playable lane. So it is much safer and more consistent to just depend on the enemy messing up or making them mess up, playing the lane normally, rather than try to do this very convoluted tactic where both of you need to know what's going on. Otherwise, you can mess it up and end up in a worse situation than you were just like in the regular matchup. So that's why you really only see pros do creep dragging very often, and like I said, not very much in this current meta. What's going on here is that you are going to aggro the enemy creep wave behind their tower and drag it over to your side. You're watching an ideal situation where no one is stopping you at all on the screen right now. you are going to give the enemy carry uncontested farm when you do this and they respond correctly, because you're literally leaving the lane bringing creeps around, right? So when they react correctly and drag the enemy, your creep wave to their next creep wave, no one is there, they're going to farm freely. But they were already getting free farm and they were getting everything. But now, because you're creep dragging, you are denying a full wave from them in the same way they deny a full wave from you. But that means you're both getting farm and you're both getting reduced farm, which if you can play the lane and go for more, you would rather do that. But in a situation where you were getting nothing and they were getting everything, both getting something and a reduced amount is much better for you and worse for them. If you're going to creep drag, you usually want to block both neutral camps, but at the minimum, you want to block the enemy small camp. In the past, you used to be able to do this with just using the creeps to block both camps, and part of the reason creep dragging has dropped off is because they made that much more difficult. So if you're going to do this, try to buy a sentry and block off the enemy small camp at the least before you do this. Objectives out of the lane are the same as position 5, but you're just more likely to do them for the reasons we've already discussed. In terms of helping the mid lane, if both heroes build bottle, I really recommend you try to do this. The 2-minute water rune can be tough. It's okay if you don't do that one. The 4-minute can be nice. The power runes I really recommend, because from there you could get lucky, you get a double damage, invis, haste, and suddenly your mid laner picks up a free kill, maybe picks up a double kill, and it just starts snowballing from there. You're now stronger, you get the next rune, you get the rune after that, and it just like goes from there, right? Plus mid laners are the most likely to tilt out, so you're protecting your mid from tilting by helping them out, and you're making the enemy mid more likely to tilt and giving yourself an advantage throughout the game. So when both heroes build bottle, really, really consider it as a high priority. If only one hero builds a bottle, it can still be very good to do, but it might just be a lower priority. And if no one builds a bottle, again, if you have nothing else to do, it's still good to go get yourself a rune, but it is then the least important compared to when both mid laners are building bottle. Many players still aren't in the habit of using the twin gate enough, but it is a great way to head over to the other half of the map and gank that lane to help out there. But it's just like the mid lane. Take a look. If it doesn't look like you can do anything, then you don't have to go. But it is an option for you that you didn't have in the past. So if you're not even thinking about it, if you're not even moving your screen down there to see if they're even low health, then that is really something you should incorporate into your play, because you'll find more often than not, there's a couple opportunities almost every single game. Stacking can be really good to do, but actually I talk about it in more detail later on, so hold that thought for a moment. Wisdom runes should be your #1 priority at minute 7, or I guess like think about it at like 6 minutes around that time. Start setting up the lane so that you're free to move over at 7 minutes. At least you want to try to secure your own, but if you want to try to steal the enemies, teleport back, then get your own, that can also be good, but at least be thinking about the wisdom runes at 7 minutes. Like I said, #1 priority. Going home to regen, lowest priority. Something I didn't include here is the bounty rune. It is relatively low priority right now. It's more like you are doing something else and oh, the bounty rune is still there, so I grab it. Not that the bounty rune is bad, but just other things are more important, like being in your lane, the lotuses spawning at the same time, or then like you go to the bounty rune at 3 minutes, but then what, right? There's no power rune in the mid lane at that point. It's just this awkward timing usually. If it's 6 minutes, then the power rune is more important than the bounty rune, so you go to the power rune. So a lot of times the bounty rune is just less important than these other things. Plus, at a higher level, many people leave the bounty rune for the mid laners who build bottles, because they will go for power runes, water runes, and sometimes they'll walk over to use the bounty rune to refill their bottle as well. So many supports just leave it for the mid laner to deal with rather than grabbing it for yourself. But if you ever see 2 bounty runes there, I would go ahead and grab either both of them or just grab one and tell your mid like, oh, I left one here for you if you need it. If they don't need it, then go ahead and grab both. But I would not make the bounty rune a priority for yourself. If you have literally nothing else to do, then maybe, but double stacking is probably more important than the bounty rune as well. So like I said, it's more of just like I was walking through the area and it was still there, so I took it. Let's talk a little bit more about some ganking details since we're more likely to do it as a soft support. First, let's think about vision. A couple tools you have here are wards and smokes. Not just for yourself to set up wards to find enemies that might be low health walking around in the jungle to pick off, but also if you're going to, say, the mid lane and you head in and suddenly they just back off, they might have a ward there. So it's good to have a sentry on you, and once you suspect they have a ward down, you place your sentry. Maybe you can at least get a D ward out of your time. So you didn't get the kill, but you remove some of their vision. That might make your next gank work out now that they can't see you. You could also use a smoke of deceit to go through their vision if you think they might have one set up, and then D ward after the fact. You can also wait till nighttime in case they have no wards, but it's just daytime and they just, they see you coming. You don't have the best gap closers. Well, if you wait till nighttime, everyone has reduced vision, and that makes it easier to sneak up closer and then go in. You can also depend on the angle of approach, thinking about like where people have their screen. This is like very meta of just not like in the game, but like physically playing the video game, how you might be looking at it. Even if they can technically see your hero, if their screen does not see your hero, then they don't really see you, do they? So when you approach from behind, they are less likely to be looking there because most people have their screen angled in a way that they are looking at creeps they want to farm, so you approach in from angles where they're not looking. You can also use the high ground to your advantage. There's different like high ground, low grounds throughout the map, but the most common is in the mid lane. Wait for the enemy mid laner to walk into the river, and then they can't see the high ground. Now you walk in. If they immediately back out, they have like an observer giving them high ground vision still. If they stay in there, then they don't have vision. You get your gank off, and there's no observers, at least in the angle you came, or they're really bad for whatever reason. Then we need to consider the initiation. So you could just be a really fast hero that can just literally run someone down and they can't get away fast enough. That will work. You could also have some kind of gap closing ability that is very quick so that they don't really get much time to react, even after they see you. And you need to consider their mobility, because if you blink in, but they have their own way to blink out, then maybe that's not worth your time. Or you need to save your gap closer for them to use their escape, and then you use your gap closer to then, follow in. Now, the initiation does not have to come from you. If you're ganking the mid lane, then as long as your mid hero has a way to initiate, maybe you just need to bring the damage. Now, one-on-ones in the early game, it is very hard to just solo kill people. But when you bring in a second or third hero, that is when there's usually enough damage. But of course, this gets much easier when enemies are low health already for whatever reason, usually harassing in the lane. So keep your eye on the map, even if you don't think, oh, that's a very tough gank, right? Pub games, guys. People make mistakes all the time. They step under towers. So make sure you're checking the map, because it's usually pretty hard to kill that hero, but they've got 100 health. It's not that hard now. So I'm going to go give it a go. One of the best moves you can make to win a game is to gank someone that just respawned, teleported back to lane, and then you kill them again. Now, someone dying once sucks. But they respawn, they teleport back, and usually the enemy heroes are a little bit low because, they just killed you. They had to use mana. Maybe they took some damage doing it. They didn't have that much time in the early game. You're dead like 20, 25 seconds. So how many creeps could they really have pushed in and denied from you? Sometimes sometimes it's a good chunk, but often there are creeps waiting for you when you come back. So you come back full health as this like carry that died, and it's not the worst. There's still ways to play the game. But if you get killed a second time right away, as soon as you TP back in, then you're dead again, another 20 to 25 seconds, and now you don't have a teleport. So now you got to slowly walk to the lane. So now instead of this like 20, 25 second setback where it wasn't the worst, now you have like this minute and a half where you died twice, lost all that gold, and you didn't farm any of that time. And in that whole time, the enemy heroes were farming up. They had time to buy regen, to walk home to Fountain, to come back out. So now you come back to the lane, they have a huge advantage over you, you are behind, they have the resources to punish you, and that is really hard. So when you see someone important die, like a carry or a mid lane, strongly consider whether you can immediately run over with like a smoke of deceit or something and kill them as soon as they teleport back in or shortly after, because that is a huge play. We've already touched on some of this, but just to consolidate it all in one spot and add in a little bit more detail, before you roam, think about what your offlaner is going to do while you're gone. Because even if you think the mid lane and the carry are more important to focus on, I don't want my offlaner to be useless. It's going to make him sad, make his game hard. That's going to make my game hard. So try to make sure they can still get golden experience while you're gone. For example, help them get their escape or survivability tools. That might be a certain level they need to have access to all their abilities, or maybe they finish phase boots to run away quickly, Vanguard to be very tanky in the 2v1, or they can now jungle and get golden XP there while you're gone. That's just going to help everyone involved while you roam. Get equilibrium back to your tower. We did talk about that earlier, but there's a good time to mention the #1 pet peeve of offlaners, and a huge mistake the 4 support can make, is to get equilibrium back and then just sit behind your offlaner watching them farm. Now, I know I said the 4 support can split more XP with the offlaner, but you are still a support that generally wants to funnel XP and gold to the offlaner, and this is the perfect time to do it, especially because we have a huge list of things we can do to roam, right? To stack runes, lotuses. If nothing else, you should try to prevent the enemy hard support from doing a pull to get equilibrium away from your tower. You could at least harass the enemy carry while your offlaner farms, right? You do not want to just sit there watching them farm. Now, sometimes it's kind of okay, especially if you're in a bad matchup and it looks like they might dive you guys, or you are very close to a certain level, you just want that and then you'll move. That is okay. It is like, in moderation, things are fine. But if every time the lane gets to a good spot and you just sit there, you are doing yourself a disservice. You have done it's frequently the hard part is getting good equilibrium, and now you get to go do the other stuff, the fun stuff, the cool stuff about playing position 4. So if you just sit there, no one's winning. It's so sad. So please try to think of something else to do once you get the lane in a good spot. Try to get a hard camp open before roaming, and if you are able to get boots before roaming, that will help you for a couple different reasons. Earlier we mentioned it's easy to get underleveled because while you're moving around, you're getting no golden XP, so the faster you are, the less time it takes to do the roaming, and the more time you have for the actual objectives at each destination, which will usually get you more golden experience. It's also going to help with your actual ganks because not everyone calls missing right away, right? You disappear for a few seconds, they're like, oh, he might still be nearby just in fog of war. So the faster you are to reach your next destination, your gank target, the less time that the enemy suspects that you're doing something. But if you take a really long time, you're gone for like a minute, they're like, where the heck is this guy? Everyone be careful. But if you're really fast, just 10 seconds from one lane to the next lane, because you have boots, windlace, smoke, then they're not going to really suspect anything. They still think you're in the area, and then boom, you're in another part, successful gank, you surprised everyone, you've tilted them, it's like, why didn't you ping missing, right? Very good gank. Early game mindset is very similar to the hard supports, same with the things to do, but 2 things I want to highlight here. 1, warding is your responsibility as well, so don't just leave it to the hard support. And deep wards in particular are much easier for you to place than the hard support because you're faster, you're already roaming, it's already in your like path of things to do, whereas the hard support is usually stuck in that safe lane a bit more, so it's really out of their way to twin gate over, walk into the enemy jungle, place one, walk all the way back, right? It's not natural for them depending on the game, but it's much more natural for you. So make sure you pick up an observer or 2 and place it for your team. It makes life much easier for your hard support, but it directly benefits you because you're the one who wants to find a low health carry and then just get an easy kill. So make sure you pick up some observers and sentries to make your own life easier. The off lane is near the triangle where there's an ancient camp and a hard camp, and you should not underestimate the value of that double stack. Even if you can't double stack, an ancient camp is the best camp you could stack. A hard camp is a great camp to stack as well. There's tons of value here. To put it into perspective for you, a double stack of the ancient hard camp is worth about 300 gold and 400 experience. Now that varies, but that is roughly equivalent to a hero kill in the early game, depending on how much gold people have and how much, like what level they are. But think about the consistency of it. A double stack is very easy to do once you know how to do it, and you can do that every single minute. How easy is it to get a hero kill? Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's harder. Now, of course, there's more value to a hero kill beyond just the golden net worth or golden experience because that hero's dead. They're going to miss out on some last hits, things like that. You have now a little bit of tower pressure, maybe get a second follow-up kill, things like that. So there's more potential in getting kills, but there's also more risk, right? I'm sure you guys have gone for a gank and then you end up feeding and like, oh, oops, I didn't know, didn't mean to do that, right? So sometimes when kills look pretty difficult or like you just don't have the resources, things like that, double stacking or just the single stacking of those camps is very valuable. Now, one more consideration though is to consider when are people going to do stacks and how easy is it to actually do the stacks? Sometimes you just don't have the right heroes for it. Sometimes you do. Sometimes heroes aren't going to farm stacks until like 15 minutes with the Battle Fury, so you don't really need to be maxing the stacks at like 3, 4, 5 minutes. Other times, you do have a mid-hero who is very good at clearing stacks, maybe not the Ancient Camp, but they can kill off a hard stack at like minute 5. So if you actually get a couple stacks in there, you could give a really good tempo swing to your mid-hero, right? It all comes down to thinking about what your teammates can farm, but just do not underestimate the value that is there in stacking. If you do end up underleveled from roaming, then consider holding a lane for your team. If there's any dead lanes, you can spend some time in there. You can stand near the stacks that you did, or if they're farming the stacks, then you go to the lane that they were just in. Like if the mid laner is doing stacks, you go to the mid lane. And then if you can organize a gank, depending how likely you think it is to succeed, getting kills is a source of experience. So if you can buy smokes and then like, hey, we just need to smoke to this carry, kill them, I will then get levels, right? If you think it's easy enough to do, then go for it. After the laning stage in the early game, a lot of the support considerations start to overlap, and you can kind of be thinking about the same stuff, but you'll just have more gold and experience typically. However, I do want you to remember that, like I said, there is more overlap now. So sometimes you will take a step back and you will become the like hard support as the game progresses, depending on the draft. Because sometimes there are games where, you know, whatever hero was playing hard support just has a really good game and items on them are really good and you want them to get more gold, and that is totally okay. Don't be so selfishly stuck that like, I'm position 4, I gotta be rich. Do whatever you need to do to win the game. And sometimes you don't actually do that much in the game, but the position 5 will. So you just kind of like swap that farm priority and you win a game. You get some MMR. That's part of being a good 4 support, is knowing when to step back. But you will get the benefit of usually being in the default of like getting more gold than the hard support. So that's everything I wanted to include in this video. I know we could always go into more detail, but I hope this was a good general basic guide to get you going. And I will try to have more specific replay reviews to give you that very specific case-by-case examples to build up that experience to then make those choices in your own games. Thank you for watching. I will see you in another video.